weeks post-Cabinet media conference. As you can see, we have with us here this afternoon the Honourable Prime Minister Dr. Rowley, who will address us shortly. I just have a couple items I'd like to raise. The first is that you all should be aware by now that the government today launched the NIF, and there is a communication program ongoing with respect to the NIF. A lot has been said about it. We'll continue to encourage everyone to look at the NIF as an investment for the future. The government policy behind the NIF, as has been explained, is a very unique one, and we see it as a great opportunity for all of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to participate in bond instruments that yield interest rates that no other deposit can compete with, from as low an investment as $1,000. More will be said on that in the coming days, but we just wanted to announce that it has been officially launched today. All approvals are in place, and you have 1 month to place your subscriptions for the NIF bonds, and we believe it is a good investment. The second issue I'd like to raise today is, as we had indicated last week, a cabinet-appointed team met with both INCAT and OSTAL from Australia yesterday. The ministers present were myself, Minister Moses, Minister Dillon, Minister LaHunt, and then we had a number of other cabinet-appointed persons, Mr. Demi Cruikshank from Tobago, the chairman of the Port Authority, Mr. Lyle Alexander, Mr. Marvin Gonzalez from the Ministry of Works and Transport, 2 professors from the University of Trinidad and Tobago with particular emphasis in the maritime industry. We had very, very good presentations made by both INCAT and OSTAL. We're quite excited, and we will be taking our recommendations to Cabinet next week with certain options and proposals for the Cabinet to deliberate on and take decisions with respect to the purchase of 2 new fast ferry vessels that are state-of-the-art, and we're looking at a 100-meter vessel and a 94-meter vessel that, as I say, are state-of-the-art and specifically designed for Trinidad and Tobago in our waters, but I don't want to preempt anything. We will be taking our recommendations to Cabinet yesterday. It is just to notify the public that the meetings did take place as planned yesterday, and next week Cabinet will deliberate on these matters pursuant to the recommendations from this Cabinet-appointed committee. Within recent times, the third point I'd like to raise with you all today is with respect to YTEP. Within recent times, the public of Trinidad and Tobago would have seen some very disconcerting and disturbing evidence before a Joint Select Committee of Parliament, where the Chief Executive Officer stood accused of certain behavior that is unbecoming of that office, and in particular there were allegations of dishonesty and untruths being told. I am announcing here today that we have received notification that today, the 12th of July, the board of YTEP has issued a termination letter to Mr. Nigel Forgini, the Chief Executive Officer, or rather the former Chief Executive Officer of YTEP. They referred to recent discussions and responses he gave at the meeting of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, which was held on the 4th of July, and then a subsequent meeting that the board called him into on the 5th of July. The board has reviewed his responses at both meetings. He was given an opportunity to be heard. He was afforded the opportunity to defend his performance. And after deliberating on the matter, the board has today issued a letter where it has decided and indicated its decision. It can no longer continue to repose any confidence in Mr. Forgini as the Chief Executive Officer, and as a consequence, his employment with the company is to be terminated with immediate effect. So this is what has taken place today at YTEP, with the board of YTEP terminating Mr. Forgini after a proper due process, based on certain information that first came to the floor at the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the 4th of July 2018. So this took place approximately 8 days later. That is all that I have to announce at this time. I'll invite the Honourable Prime Minister to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young. Thank you very much, members of the media, for coming out today. Normally, I would, on returning from a CARICOM meeting, have a press conference, and I've had many of those at the at the Piarco airport. But when I get back in at an inconvenient hour, late at night like I did last Saturday, I didn't have the opportunity to speak to you about the Montego Bay meeting, which was the full heads of government meeting. As you know, CARICOM heads of government meet twice a year. We meet in the early part of the year in what we call the intersessional, and mid-year at the full meeting. And so there were a couple of issues, all important, that I wanted to raise with you. Unfortunately, in the absence of that press conference upon my return, the opportunity arose for mischief and misinformation, and right on target, there was sufficient mischief and misinformation coming out with respect to what transpired in Jamaica. Let me just indicate to you and for all of you that there's a communique that's now published on the Prime Minister's website, the OPM website, and I think other areas. The communique from the CARICOM Secretariat is available for detailed study. And I just want to mention to you the matters that attracted our attention in this meeting at Montego Bay. Item number one, the very first item, which took up quite a bit of, I think it was Wednesday, the first day of the meeting, was the whole question of the Caribbean single market and economy. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then, of course, we had some extensive discussions on the whole question of the legal opinion which relate to the entitlement of Haitian nationals to automatic stay of 6 months upon arrival in CARICOM member states. As you know, there has been a development in law in the CARICOM which I don't think most people are aware of and should become aware of, and it came up in the meeting, requiring further public education. That is, there has been a ruling at the Caribbean Court of Justice, the gist of the Shenik Mairi case, I think it is, where decisions of heads of government meeting are in effect binding as law on members of the CARICOM. So what that means is that if you take decisions at the heads of government meeting under the treaty, those decisions are to be treated in the court as binding on, and members are not free to choose which one they follow and not follow. The decisions are binding as law. That's an important development which will guide us as we go forward, because there are a number of things existing within the CARICOM family and the CARICOM business where that principle of the decisions being taken but not being followed has now reached the point where we are having to pay attention to it, and the populations of our various island and territories should be paying attention to that. There was a lot of discussion and work done on the question of disaster preparedness and so on. And most importantly, you may recall, with respect to the free movement of citizens of the CARICOM, we have decisions as to certain categories of people who, by virtue of their established qualifications, should be allowed and are being allowed to move freely within the region. That has been going on by and large relatively smoothly. But some countries were accepting some of those persons easily and others not so easily, even though the decision has been made. I think there are 11 categories of persons whom the CARICOM heads have agreed should, upon qualification and establishment of such qualification, be allowed to move freely within the region. So it was determined that every effort should be made before we go any further in broadening the categories of persons who are expecting to or entitled to move in this anticipation, that we should ensure that these 11 categories are being acted upon without hindrance by the various territories. And that decision met with the approval of the heads of government meeting, that the Prime Minister of St. Vincent led this discussion, and it was very forcefully made that we should have these 11 categories available for persons to move freely within. Then it was raised again by the Prime Minister of Barbados at her first meeting as Prime Minister of Barbados. She raised and got the meeting to agree, after lengthy discussions, generally in agreement, that the contingent rights of individuals associated with persons who access that free movement from those 11 categories should be operationalized. Meaning, if an individual accesses Trinidad and Tobago from another CARICOM territory to live and work in Trinidad and Tobago, that person might have a family. And it is now the position that the contingent rights of the wife and the children of such a person should be acknowledged and should be allowed to come into force without hindrance. So the wife who comes with the husband who has a job in a CARICOM territory should be allowed to work, and the children should be allowed to access school and health care as if they were at home in the territory from which they have come. Those rights are the contingent rights that flow from other persons who access rights by virtue of being qualified to move interstate. This decision was taken since 2014, but it was not been operationalized by the territories. This is one of the classic examples of the heads of government taking decisions to advance Caribbean integration at these various meetings, but then not acting upon it. And meeting after meeting, the matter comes up. So on this meeting in Jamaica, this issue came up, and the gathering, and I should tell you, every single head was at that meeting. It is not normal that every single leader is at the meeting. Sometimes different things happen in different territories, and you may have a leader or 2 or 5 missing. In Jamaica, in Montego Bay, every single leader of every CARICOM territory, plus the associated ones, were all there. And the discussions were very lively, and agreed that we should proceed in this way. But for those territories that had not signed on to it, it was Barbados' position that, well, the thing to do to indicate our acceptance of this position now is that we sign it right now. Even though there was agreement that we should do it, I think the trust wasn't there that we should leave and go home and not do it. But there was, in the case of Jamaica, Jamaica was chairing the meeting, and the Jamaican Prime Minister took the position to ask for an excuse of his authority from chairman to function as Prime Minister, to say to the meeting that, yes, Jamaica agrees that we'll go this way, but before Jamaica signs, he wants to have a word with his Attorney General to ensure that the delay was not as a result of any legal matter in the AG's office which has not been satisfied, and therefore needed a few, whatever period of time, days or hours or so, to settle that matter. And of course, there was acceptance of that position. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago took the same position, accepting what Jamaica had said, that we will sign immediately, but not on the moment, that day, because I too, like the Jamaican Prime Minister, would like to have a word with my Attorney General to make sure that as I sign, that there is no issue which would have arisen during the delay period, so that when we sign, we don't have any conflict. And in my case, Trinidad and Tobago's Attorney General was not available to me, so I needed a couple of days to get that done. I saw it at the end that the Jamaicans had got their situation sorted out, and in the communique, I think you will see where Jamaica is listed as having accepted and signed. You will see Trinidad and Tobago not signing, because our Attorney General at this time is still in Europe. I was quite disappointed to have seen an attack launched on me as Prime Minister, on the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and on the people of Trinidad and Tobago by some itinerant person, former UWI lecturer or whatever he is, who was completely without any information on this matter. But as is common in Trinidad and Tobago, you start out by saying you don't know, and then you proceed to get on your horse and prance. But I would like to ask you to dismiss that as the intervention of an uninformed person masquerading as an expert on this matter. Trinidad and Tobago, once the Attorney General tells me that there is no issue standing in the way of the 2014 decision, Trinidad and Tobago will sign that protocol at the first opportunity, and we will then be bound and operationalizing the contingent rights situation. In that same discourse of the expert who brought this issue to the fore before I could speak to you on it, the whole question of Trinidad and Tobago's leadership in CARICOM was called into question. And that questioning of our leadership went as far as to question our behavior as a deviation from the PNM's policy. Well, that sounds good to persons who, again, without information, would like to present us for ridicule, and of course, for persons who are not worthy of the office we hold. Let me correct the record. Nothing is further from the truth. As a matter of fact, the leadership which Trinidad and Tobago is demonstrating now at CARICOM has not been demonstrated since Prime Minister Patrick Manning left office in 2010. Let me remind the population that in 2011, even though the CARICOM market is Trinidad and Tobago's most significant market for our manufactured products, and having all kinds of implications for us in terms of earnings and employment and stability in our economy and so on. In 2011, in the absence of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who had more important things to do in partying in Tobago, the single market and economy was taken off the agenda of CARICOM and remained that way until I became Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And at my first or second meeting, I think it was, must have been the second meeting, Trinidad and Tobago asked, by way of request to the Secretariat, to have this matter of the single market and economy put back on the agenda. Because we, with so much at stake in the CARICOM market, ought not to and could not continue to have the development or even the existence of this market taken off the agenda. It was put back on the agenda, and since then, every meeting has advanced the discussion as to whether goes Trinidad and Tobago, the CARICOM, in the vision towards having a single market and economy as our objective. However, in the meantime, a very interesting development took place. There was an election in Jamaica. And the new Jamaican Prime Minister put in place a team led by a former Jamaican Prime Minister, Prime Minister Holness, current and new Prime Minister, engaged the services of former Prime Minister Bruce Golding to do the following: to review Jamaica's relations within CARICOM and CARIFORUM frameworks, meaning that Jamaica was taking a closer look as to whether there is any real role or any good reason to continue aspiring to a single market and economy. And further, if there is one, whether Jamaica is benefiting and whether Jamaica should continue to support such a development. That report was presented to us a few months ago, and an oral presentation was made to us in Jamaica by Prime Minister Goulding, who chaired the committee. I should tell you that before Prime Minister Goulding prepared his report for the Jamaican Prime Minister and the Jamaican Parliament, he consulted me and other CARICOM heads to get our views so that that could influence what he puts as Jamaica's advice from one Prime Minister to another government. And at the conference in Montego Bay, the conference commended Jamaica for undertaking the very comprehensive review contained in the report of the Commission to review Jamaica's relations within CARICOM and CARIFORUM under the chairmanship of Mr. Bruce Goulding, former Prime Minister. The conference agreed that the findings and recommendation in the report must be examined in detail to determine what could be of most benefit to achieving the objectives of member states and the community and what is most doable. The conference agreed that the report will be subject to further review at a proposed special meeting of the conference in November 2018. I should point out that this meeting, this special meeting that will take place in Port of Spain in November, is at the request of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, so that the discussions about the single market and economy could be focused and crystallized so that we could all be better able to work towards the vision or to protect the vision of a single market and economy. You would have seen a statement from the Bahamas, which even before this meeting has taken place, has made it categorically clear that Bahamas, while wanting and will remain a part of the CARICOM, will not subscribe to a single market and economy. So at least one country has made its position very clear, and the others are to do so maybe in Port of Spain in November. I had asked for this meeting about 2 meetings ago, and while it was agreed upon, it wasn't acted upon. It's acted upon on this occasion when the request was made again, against the background of the Jamaican report, if I may say so myself. But I must tell you that the Jamaican Prime Minister has indicated to Conference of CARICOM leaders that Jamaica has no intention of abandoning CARICOM. And maybe I may put in brackets at this stage, but he didn't say that. However, the fact that the work has been done, and more importantly, you may not see this in the communique, you may not see it in the discussions made public, but I must tell you, a significant part of the time we spent in conference discussed whether or not the single market and economy was a bridge too far for CARICOM governments, and whether the reason for us not progressing is that CARICOM nations have viewed this objective as one that will generate winners and losers, and no government, no Prime Minister leading a government wants to be a loser in this matter, and as a result of which the movement for closer integration has pretty much been stymied. The discussion went further as to whether, in the absence of attaining our objectives of a single market and economy, an issue which was taken off our agenda, fortunately is now back on the agenda, whether in fact, in that absence, whether we should not aspire to a single market without a single economy. That was part of the discussion, but did not find favor with many Caribbean leaders. The position was that we should continue to work towards a single market and economy, difficult as that might be. The Port of Spain meeting of November will put all of these issues, with all their far-reaching implications, squarely in front of the Caribbean people in CARICOM, so that doable decisions can be made from November going forward. That is the role of Trinidad and Tobago in CARICOM, and that is where our leadership has influenced our development on these issues to date. So against that background, we say to those who accuse us in the PNM or in the government of Trinidad and Tobago of abdicating our responsibility, we simply ask them to stop misrepresenting the facts and stop misinforming our public. I also want to let you know that while I was in Jamaica, Acting Prime Minister Imbert indicated to me that there were some issues surrounding the functioning of Minister MacDonald, who we subsequently discovered had been hospitalized. She remains hospitalized, and given the nature of her hospitalization and her ability to function in the assignment that she is carrying, I have today advised the President that during her period of sick leave, whether home or institution or in an institution, that Minister Alison West would act in the portfolio of public administration. And we wish Minister MacDonald a speedy recovery and a complete one at that. I also want to take the opportunity to mention that this last weekend we have experienced once again in Trinidad and Tobago, on this occasion in my own constituency, very heinous actions on the part of some of our citizens who have cold-bloodedly slaughtered others, endangered very many more, and have added to the trauma that the nation is feeling, particularly those communities, those streets, those families who are experiencing this chronic crime wave which has been affecting our country for the longest while. I need not go into any discussion to convince anyone that the crime level in Trinidad and Tobago is affecting us in very many ways. Not just safety and security. It's affecting us in watering down our opportunities for economic expansion and economic growth. It is watering down our country's potential to sell ourselves as a kind of place into which certain kinds of investments are attractive. And also, we are losing in our communities the sense of brotherly love. We are losing within our families the responsibilities for the young people that we raise and their respect for other life forms. Against all of that background, I simply want to give the country the assurance that the government of Trinidad and Tobago would be resolute in pursuing safety and security as a #1 priority in Trinidad and Tobago. It is difficult for the population to accept that, I know, because our results have not been good, but we will not abdicate that responsibility, and we will not settle for second place, and we will continue to direct resources where we know they're needed, and we'll continue to exhort those persons on the payroll whose job it is to ensure that there is significant improvement in this area. With respect to the police service, it is my expectation that somewhere in the not too distant future, we'll be able to appoint a commissioner of police to inject into the police service that much needed fillip of doing things And that sounded like a name we just dealt with. But that we need to be doing some things, not just a little differently, but considerably differently. And the government is not averse to making those changes and going forward to ensure that those who choose crime as a way of life see Trinidad and Tobago was not the place where such a direction would prosper. I'm sure that you would have some questions for me, and I will try to answer them as we spend a few more minutes at this podium. Yes, Joel.
Prime Minister, in light of what you just said with regards to the fight against crime, Minister Hines had said that the government would like to see the police service and those involved in the crime fight behave as if there's a crisis in our hands. With regard to the issue of crime, in light of that, is the issue of a state of emergency something that the government would consider at all?
We are not considering that at this time. We do not see it as an effective way of changing what is happening, because a state of emergency will not necessarily give us the safety and security that we're looking for. There'll be negative developments on the economy, and that being an obvious outcome would in itself create the environment for further growth of criminal conduct among persons who believe that an absence of opportunity is what is causing them to be excused for what they're doing. We believe that within the environment where there isn't a state of emergency, those who are identified or identifiable as breaking the law, information about wrongdoing can be pursued and executed without a state of emergency. A previous government had held out to us in 2015 that a state of emergency was the panacea to crime in this country. In fact, that government had accused its predecessor of not having the testicular fortitude of doing what was obviously the easiest and simplest thing to do, to treat with the crime wave. And a state of emergency was declared, and we now know that it did not in any way result in a reduction of the guns on the street, or the gunmen who would use them, or the persons who would have been slaughtered. We are focusing on getting firearms off the street, stopping them from coming into our country, identifying persons who are using them against citizens, engaged in wrongdoing and criminal conduct of all types. Basically what we're talking about is establishing, sustaining a police service response, a national security service response that would put the advantage on the side of the state and not on the side of the criminals, who by their behavior, one could conclude, are of the view that they can act with impunity. We also are taking steps to ensure that where persons are apprehended, that they get swift justice, and where they are convicted, that they be incarcerated in an environment that is worthy of that outcome. So we're working on all fronts, and we expect that as we do that, if everybody pulls his or her weight, including persons with information who know who are carrying these firearms, who know who are using them, that information is valuable to the success of our fight in crime. And for those officers within the system who are either not pulling their weight or who are engaged in corrupt practice, endangering their colleagues and the rest of the country, those who know who are involved in that, information is the key. Because this government is quite prepared to act decisively where we have the authority in defense of the public interest. Yes?
Prime Minister, do you think more robust policing might be part of the answer? When I refer to more robust policing, there is a balance between constitutional rights and people's right to live in a free from the fear of crime. And maybe the government may wish to consider a more robust kind of policing, which may infringe the constitutional rights of some people.
Such as?
I'm referring to roadblocks, what the US call stop and frisk, and other measures that would make the police service more visible, police and perhaps army as well.
Could I surprise you? The answer is yes. And I could tell you that the Minister of National Security, who does not have responsibility for operations, has been virtually begging for that to happen, because we see no problem with stop and search on the highways and the byways without notice, and of course with great frequency, as an operation that will improve the possibility of not just apprehending those who use the roads to go from place to place in furtherance of their illicit activity, but also in giving the population the view that the state agencies are prepared to stand in the gap with them. I can tell you, and we keep saying this all the time, it is not everything that you would like to happen from the level of the cabinet or the government that would happen because you say so. Authority in this country is very diffused. I could tell you that as Prime Minister, I have no problem in supporting a situation where our streets are subject to the actions of officers from all legal arms of state, inspecting persons and their vehicles to determine whether in fact there is reason to come to a conclusion that they are law-abiding or that they are engaged in activity which pose a threat to the population. So I don't know that this is an infringement of any right. It's an operation which is available under the current arrangements. Question is, do we have the resources to do it? We do have considerable resources. Do we have the will to do it? Well, we measure that by some kind of yardstick, which could be variable. Have we been doing it? Some of it, not enough. And so therefore, there is much space for growth in that exercise.
What about the issue of capital punishment, which has been put on the table and then taken off, and maybe put under the table and
it's not taken off. Capital punishment remains the law in Trinidad and Tobago, and as a government we have said it remains the law, and we're making no, in fact we have argued that we don't interfere in trying to tweak it, because to do so is to lose it off the books. And it's not taken off the table. What is happening is that to get it done, you have to follow certain procedures, and those procedures are in fact fashioned in delays, to put it mildly. But to allow capital punishment to become part of the conversation, you first have to have detection, you have to have arrest, you have to have a successful conviction, and you have to have a sentence. Only then does capital punishment as an action come into play with respect to someone who has earned the right to capital punishment.
Called on people to provide evidence to the police, to the authorities.
Not evidence,
but to provide
information.
On those who have guns, who are in the gangs and so on. But the problem really is that people do not have the trust in the police to protect the confidentiality of information that is provided, because they are fearful that the very people who have the guns and who are in the gangs will know that they are the ones who provided the information and they are the informants. How do you treat with that? Because unless that is very good.
I will not for 1 minute dismiss what you have said, because that is very real. And that is why there ought to be no tolerance within the security services, police or otherwise, for persons who bring those agencies into disrepute and who fuel that mistrust. There ought to be no tolerance for that, because as long as people are of the view that there are corrupt officers or a large amount of corrupt officers within the population of those services, that is what you're going to get. But that being so, there are avenues which are relatively secure, where persons could provide information without overly exposing themselves. And it would be for the police to act on that information, to convert it into evidence. And those who lead the police service have a duty to so conduct the business of the police service as to impress upon the population that trust could be restored and engendered.
Apart from that, I know Crime Stoppers. Is
Well,
there any other mechanism?
I am sure that in many instances there are persons with information who could make that information even available anonymously without exposing themselves. I am not saying that you go out there and do things to cause persons to retaliate against you, but many persons who know what is going on in our country could let the authorities know without overly exposing themselves. If you think it's going to expose you, well, then I'm not asking you to expose yourself. But a police service lives effectively on information. And if the population is taking the view that they will not assist the police with information which they may have, then you are also taking the view that what is going on can be protected by your silence or your lack of cooperation.
On the issue of Anthony's question about the stop and frisk, you are saying that the government has no problem with that, but it seems to be either an unwillingness or maybe a lack of implementation by the police service in doing more of those. Can that be addressed from a policy perspective in any way to ensure that we see more of that?
Well, it is being addressed. I mean, understand, as I said early on, the Minister of National Security would like to see more of that. But you know, what we see some roadblocks. And then after a few days, when things cool down, you don't see it. And until something happens again, we are saying that this approach to screening people on the road should be an ongoing approach. And we would like to see even small teams of people on motorbikes, in a car, pull up alongside any road and institute a roadblock. Maybe for 10, 20, 100 cars, and then move on somewhere else. That sends a message that somebody is watching and somebody is paying attention to your movement. And if you are moving with guns and ammunition and whatever else that's illegal substance, you stand a chance of running into something like that. And that would put pressure on persons who need to move to commit their nefarious activities. But as I said, I do not know if it's an absence of resources or whether in fact it is the view of some managers that this is not a worthwhile activity that should be engaged in on a consistent basis. And we need to review how we are utilizing the resources available. And it's against that background why this government has done a manpower audit of the police service. And that manpower audit has been found, the documentation of that exercise has found its way into the Parliament, has been the subject of a joint select committee of the Parliament, and would be the subject of a debate in the Parliament soon after we get back after this holiday, this recess period which we have just embarked upon. Because we need to determine how our resources are being utilized in the face of this ongoing intractable problem. We have already taken the decision to add more officers by way of the local government arrangement, where we are currently engaged in adding officers for increased patrols at local government level. But how else do we use the rest of the resources? What time of day? Who is doing what? How many hours? Who is interacting with whom? We used to have community policing as one of the solutions in our response to crime a few years ago. Is that still going on? And why not if not? So we are expecting that there would be some significant improvements going forward. And not sporadically in response to outrages now and then, but a sustained response. Because let's put it this way, what the criminals are showing us is that their response is sustained.
So if you have, let's say, something like the stop and frisk and so on, about profiling persons in certain communities or certain groups in society being marginalized, and the effect that could have.
Well, if it is done with an intention to ensure that you bring safety and security, I would want to think that that safety and security would apply to people of all communities of Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know any community in this country today who can tell you that we have no interest in an improvement across the board in safety and security. So any action that is meant to bring safety and security to the population should find the support of the wider national community. And to the extent that you talk about profiling, let's put it this way. Statistics don't lie. They tell you the truth of what the numbers describe. There are certain preferences for certain vehicles. There are certain times of day when certain things seem to happen more frequently. I mean, people sleep more at night than in the daytime. Isn't that true? And the documents will show that most crimes are committed at night. But there are crimes committed at dawn. But the record will show that dawn is probably the time when it's safest. So we would need to do it without malice or ill will for the benefit of all.
How do you think, because we've talked about the question of leadership and the appointment of a police commissioner, which you said is to come in the not too distant future. How would that address the issue if the police service itself is inefficient and if the other ducks are not in the row, with the court system and so on, and the question of political management of the crime situation? How would the appointment of a police commissioner change the equation?
Listen, if Neil and Massey and Samakal discover that their business is not going the way the shareholders want it to go, and then they discover that they do not have proper management initiatives and management personnel at the top, I'm sure they will have no difficulty in coming to the conclusion that their major assignment is to fix the management issues at the top. And the same thing applies to the police service or any other structure that involves management with superiors, subordinates, resources, and problems to solve.
So do you feel that there is potential political downside to the administration for how the fight on crime has been handled?
There always is. I mean, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is responsible for the state of the country, whether it is the economy, the environment, or the level of criminal conduct. That is why you have a government. And especially in this particular case, where so many citizens, so many communities, without prompting, will tell you that their concern is crime. Of course, there are those who will politicize it and try to make it believe that it is because of the nature of the politics. But the bottom line is, the government has the resources, allocate those resources as the country could afford. The government has to report to the people on how those resources are impacting on the problem, and the government is to be held responsible. I am not for 1 minute shying away from the fact that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has a responsibility, which is not now lighting up the place about how we're fighting crime successfully. I know that we are not sufficiently successful in our fight against crime. But I also know that if we do things differently, if we make better use of our resources, and if we have more buy-in from the national population, rather than politicizing this very serious development, that we as a country could get on top of this criminal problem and solve it like other communities have done.
There's an issue, maybe slightly related. You said CARICOM concerning the decriminalization with regards to marijuana and so on. A commission of CARICOM, I think, came to some conclusion. Is that something your administration is looking at as well?
Let me just again put it very simply. We have priorities, and decriminalizing marijuana is not one of them. A presentation was made to the conference by those who did the work on marijuana. There are now discussions of marijuana as an economic entity. There are those who are arguing about marijuana as a harmless substance, marijuana as a medicinal breakthrough, and so on and so on. All of this, for the government of Trinidad and Tobago, is still, the jury is still out on the science of this, and therefore we will be guided as it evolves. But at the moment, we are not running any advocacy for decriminalizing marijuana or incorporating marijuana into economic space, because we have some other priorities, and we also are not yet convinced that there's the benefit that some people are asking us to grasp.
Then advanced when that CARICOM marijuana committee report was presented at the...
If you look at the there's a statement on the presentation that was made at Montego Bay, and Trinidad and Tobago is entirely in step with that statement. If you just check it on the website, and you see what the opposition is. It's very clear. A presentation was made, we received it, and we are saying that, well, we will allow it to proceed for further advancement along the way.
Prime Minister, could you elaborate a little bit more? This is another topic here. Could you elaborate a little bit more on Ms. McDonald's actual health? Because during the course of yesterday, we got a whole lot of different versions as to what her health was, whether she was in a hospital or out of hospital. And based on the decisions taken today, is it Minister West's appointment? Is this a wait and see how Ms. McDonald fares, or could there be the possibility that maybe Ms. McDonald might not be able to continue?
I don't want to address it in that way, because I'm not in a position so to. What the government made a statement when we became aware of her condition, and the statement was that she was hospitalized and that she was seriously ill. That is the information that we have. Secondly, based on our understanding of the nature of her situation and the government business that has to be addressed, I took steps to ensure, one, that she can be allowed to recuperate without the stress of office at this time, and that also another minister assumes her responsibility. For how long, I couldn't tell you at this time.
I want to take up on Ben's point. The fact that somebody appeared not to be speaking the truth, it sort of hits at the government's credibility.
Are you accusing the government of not speaking the truth?
No, I said someone was...
So how could you say that the fact that somebody is not speaking the truth, it hits at the government's credibility?
Because as small as the issue might be, it involves a government minister. A release came out on that individual, which completely conflicted with what you had said earlier in the day and yesterday as well. So that there appears to be within the machinery of the state.
I would just ask you, if you're going to take the government in that kind of conversation, I would just ask you to confine your acceptance of the government's position to statements made by the government. As a matter of fact, the statement made by the government would have come from the Office of the Minister of Communication. And unless you are in a position to contradict that statement with facts known to you, I think it's unfair to accuse the government or any government spokesperson of not speaking the truth.
Prime Minister, what we're actually getting at here is that we had, on the one hand, the statement coming from the Communications Ministry, but the other statement, which sort of contradicts that, came from the Port South office.
We cannot speak for any other than the government's communication that it made to the population. There are people all over Facebook making statements. There are people on the, as the government made statements, and the government stand by the statements you made and the actions you take.
You're not in communication.
Just one thing,
these are not aliens. These are members of the People's National Movement who are part of a constituency represented by the People's National Movement, making statements about a People's National Movement representative.
And I am saying that might be so, but the statements made by the government are not subject to the veracity of statements made by other persons. The statements made by the government would be based on information which the government has, which may be different to what other people have. And unless you're accusing the government of being irresponsible, I would simply say that the government is not irresponsible, and we are taking positions based on the information available to the government, and the government will stand and defend the statements made by the government. We cannot accept responsibility for statements made by others who may have different information.
Well, Prime Minister, on that subject, I mean, because right now we have this particular ministry now has 2 ministers who are both basically on sick leave. Could you have any further information with respect to Minister Coffey?
All I will advise you is that if I offer you a portfolio, they don't accept it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.